Betting, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Bet with the Best podcast. Its mission is to explore better ways to bet on races, to seek out new, successful players, and to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. The Bet with the Best podcast is sponsored by Amwager, an ADW built by horse players for horse players. Speed, power, and ease of use are at the core of Amwager, designed to give players the information and tools they need to quickly make anything from a simple win bet to a complex, structured superfecta or pick 5 wager. When you combine that with data and pool updates that are up to 60 times faster than the competition, Amwager is the clear winner in wagering on races online. Those are just a few of the many special features that Amwager has to offer, along with live video and race replays, free, integrated form-to-win past performance information, conditional wagering, and true odds, which are a prediction of off odds based on all available pool data. That and much more. Amwager is licensed and operated in the U.S., and best of all, they will actually pay you to play. If you sign up now and deposit and bet $150, you will earn a $150 lump sum bonus. So there is no reason not to give Amwager a try. If you want to bet with the best, then you need the best tools to wager with. You need Amwager. Welcome to episode 29 of the Bet with the Best podcast. Joining us this week is the legendary Sheets player, Len Friedman, who was a close associate of Len Ragozin, the developer of the Sheets, and co-author of a book with Ragozin, The Odds Must Be Crazy. Welcome to the show, Len. How's it going?
It's going fine. Thank you for having me.
Well, I really appreciate you joining the show, and I know the listeners will as well. And I typically like to get the show started just so they can get to know a little bit about you. Some may or may not be familiar with you. And I call it my Horseplayer origin story, kind of how you got started in this crazy game and how it led to where it eventually led you. So if you would, please share with the listeners your Horseplayer origin story.
Well, I got involved with horse playing because of Len Ragozin. We had some political associations in common, and somebody had mentioned to me that he had developed a system for evaluating how fast horses ran. And I was a games player. I played, a lot of games, Scrabble and backgammon and bridge and all sorts of games. So I was sort of interested. So I went over to his apartment, and at that point he had a serious back injury. So he was pretty much relegated to sitting in a specially made chair. And he would do all his work sitting in the chair. And when you walked into the apartment, there was about, maybe a foot of racing forms piled on the floors, because he would work on the charts from a form, and then he would just throw it on the floor because he couldn't do anything else with it. And then somebody would come in every couple of weeks and clean it all out. But I looked at what he was doing, and it just fascinated me. The math was just so intriguing, and the approach to, trying to reduce it to formulas that interlocked, that related to each other, that he could relate how much a pound of weight meant in time, how much being outside of a horse on a turn cost you in time. And so he was able to convert it all to one number. And I just got interested in it. And I talked him into letting me take out a set of sheets, because in those days it was just the original set. I mean, there was no Xeroxes or anything. He just had a set of sheets, for the horses that were running at a track on a given day. And I was able to convince him I wouldn't lose them during the day. And I started taking them out to the track, and I started playing. And I was sort of holding my own for a while, and then I started doing very well. And that's hooked me.
So you were like the only person who had the sheets at the track?
I was the only person taking the sheets out to the track. There were a couple of other people who occasionally would use the sheets to handicap and bet with bookies. And I soon started doing that too at the tracks in the East that he did, that obviously I couldn't get to. I mean, this was in the dark ages. There was no internet. There was no way to play other than at the track or with a bookie. And so if you wanted to play more than one track in a day, you had to use a bookie. The problem was that they often stiffed you.
All right, so
and we couldn't break their legs.
I want to follow up some more about what it was like to bet then, but I do want to. Some of the listeners will be familiar with the sheets, some won't. So, if you could kind of describe what they are, and in particular, how they differ from even tools today like buyer speed figures or DRF past performances. You talked about how Len used some of that information in putting together sheets, but kind of what they are and kind of what was so different about them that made them special and unique.
Well, a sheet is essentially a life history of a horse's performances. And we give a number for each race that the horse runs. Now, the numbers are, I said, similar in concept to what the Beyer numbers are. Actually, Ragozin and Beyer developed the idea at about the same time. They were contemporaries. The difference in the sheets numbers is that the sheets numbers are an estimate of the effort the horse put out that day. And the factors that are taken into account was how fast, obviously, the horse ran, that is the finish time of the race, and a correction for the beaten lengths if it didn't win. And we do our own timing of the races. The weight the horse carried, whether the horse lost ground, the wind, a correction for the wind during the race, and a correction for how fast the track was that day. That is, was it faster than usual, and naturally we make, a different correction for the grass and for the dirt. But the idea is to synthesize all those factors into a single number. That is, we have formulas that relate those factors, how much a pound of weight is, as opposed to how much wind correction at 300 degrees, 8 miles an hour would be for that race. In other words, all those things are able to be synthesized into a single number, and it doesn't matter what track that race was run at, what distance the race was run at, what surface the race was run at. I mean, we make a different variant each day for grass and dirt, but a 12 on the dirt is the same as a 12 on the grass as far as the effort that the horse put out. And so what we're doing with the sheets is reading a lifetime performance line on each horse. And the sheets are graphed so that you can see the patterns that the horse has run. That is, horses a lot of horses will repeat their last race, but most horses don't. They bounce around. Sometimes they circle around. Sometimes they alternate good races and bad races. But that's basically what we're doing, is we're reading the pattern of numbers on the sheets, and to ask why we're different than anybody else, well, partly because we take into account things that a lot of other people don't take into account, like Beyer doesn't make corrections, Beyer doesn't make weight corrections. He doesn't do those things. He makes a track variant for each day and corrects for that, but that's about it. And there are other people that do use a lot of the factors that we use because they basically learned from us that those were the factors that were important, but I don't think they use the right formulas. That is, I just think our numbers are better. They're more accurate in measuring what effort the horse put out. But naturally, that's very self-serving. Why wouldn't I think that? I did all that work for decades.
So I'm going to kind of summarize what I think are some of the key things that you said there, and feel free to correct me if I mis-summarize. But you're trying to capture in one performance number not only how fast they went, corrected for the track variant on that day, which is pretty common with any of the speed figures, but you're also incorporating weight carried and ground loss suffered or experienced during the race, and even a correction for wind based on the intensity and direction of the wind. So you build that all into one number for that race for that horse, and then you map it on this. Well, go ahead, jump in.
Yeah, and Raguson's genius was not figuring out that all these variables were possible variables that you'd want to measure. But his genius was in figuring out that these were the right variables to measure and figuring out how to weigh them against each other. Because it doesn't do you any good to know that wind against a horse is going to slow it down. What you have to know is how much it's going to slow it down compared to how much adding 5 pounds of weight on the horse's back is going to slow it down. Figuring that out was much more complicated, and particularly was so much more complicated when Ragusin did it and figured out the whole system in the late 50s and 60s, because there were no computers then. And calculators weren't really of much help either. He basically had to do it all himself and figure these things out. And it was a monumental task. I mean, he was the genius. And I was just the cog in the machine, to keep things going. I never could have developed the system on my own. You could have given me 100 years, and I wouldn't have been able to figure out a lot of the formulas that he figured out.
For the younger guys, he used his brain and a pen and paper to model the performance for a horse in a very complicated mathematical way, and reduce it all down to one number. That's right.
Yes.
Which is pretty amazing.
Because those numbers were as accurate as they were, and I'm not saying every number is 100% accurate. I mean, we probably make mistakes here and there. I mean, everybody makes mistakes. But I think that the accuracy of the numbers is demonstrated by how the patterns create consistent results. That is, we have a certain approach in reading the patterns on the sheets, where certain patterns are very positive to us and certain patterns are very negative to us. And the proof that the numbers are accurate is that those patterns pay off. That is, the good patterns result in good numbers much, much more often than the bad patterns result in good numbers in the horse's next performance. And that can't be right unless the numbers are good.
And that gets to the second part, I think, that of the kind of unique, product was not only did you develop this number that represented the performance for the horse, but putting it on the sheet, into this graphic form that gave it, and identifying patterns, that gave you the ability to use it as a predictive tool rather than just as a number. And so can you talk a little bit about how those numbers are graphed and how that helps, make those patterns visible, kind of just the way that's mapped out? Because I think it's pretty interesting just the way what they get laid out on the sheets themselves.
Yeah, well, the sheet has columns, and each column is a year of racing. And they read from the bottom to the top, January through December. And they also read left to right. The better numbers are on the left, and they're graphed. So you're getting a series of numbers in a column that are graphed by how good the races are, and also by the timing between the races. You're able to see both. And you're able to see the horse's whole lifetime history. And to us, the important thing initially to look at is the horse's peak performances. That is, when the horse runs the best race that it's run up to that time. And we look at that horse, we call it a top. That's the horse's top. Well, let's say the horse, as a 2-year-old, ran between 25 and 20. The lower numbers are better on our scale. And then as a 3-year-old, it came out and it ran 23:20. That 20 would be matching the top that the horse ran as a 2-year-old. That would be a very strong development to us, because our experience is that when 3-year-olds hit their 2-year-old top, they're often going to improve off of that, either in their next start or maybe 2 starts, sometime in the 4 to 8 week range from the time that the horse matched the 2-year-old top. And we then look at the horse. Let's say the horse does that, and runs an 18, 2 races after it ran the 20 as a 3-year-old. Well, now its top is 18, and it reacts from that top. I mean, that was one of our contributions to sort of the lexicon of racing bouncing. All that bouncing means is that the horse has reacted to a good effort by running a poorer effort. It bounced, it reacted from that effort. And we would then sort of read the pattern of the horse. Maybe it's looping around and it runs in the low 20s and then the middle 20s, and then it comes back to the low 20s again. We might think that it's circling back around to that 18. Those are difficult reads, reading horses circling back toward tops. But what we really would be interested in is if the horse at some point, 2 months, 4 months, or 6 months later, ran a 17, ran a point better than the top that it had run before. That would be an indication that the horse was developing in a healthy manner. We've sort of called this condition handicapping. That is, we're trying to handicap, is the horse in a positive developing condition or is in a negative deteriorating condition. That is, let's say that instead of circling back to a 17 against the 18, that 4 months later, the horse, after running a bunch of races in the 20s, ran a 19. ran a point worse than that 18. Well, that would be a negative sign to us, particularly if the horse reacted backwards off the 19. That is, sometimes when a horse runs that 1 point off, it then runs a new top next time. It's just part of the forward moving circling pattern. But more often than not, it reacts from that 1 point backward move, and we would regard that horse negatively after that. That is, the horse might be running races between 19 and 23 or 24, but we would regard it as being sort of a negative horse that we would never be looking to bet on it. And if it was a short price, we'd always be looking to bet against it, because horses that are in declining condition are going to run more poor efforts than good efforts. And the same is true the other way. Horses that are in positive condition are going to run more good efforts than bad efforts. You're always looking for an excuse to bet on them. And that basically is the strategy of reading the patterns and condition handicapping. That's what you're trying to do. And I only wish that when I was first using the sheets, I understood that, because I didn't. It took years of using the sheets before I had any idea about the conditions, patterns, and things like that. When I started using the sheets, I made money because they were just an unbelievable edge. I mean, we always knew who the fastest horse in the race was, and other people didn't. People were very much involved in class handicapping at that time. That is, if the horse had been running for 10,000 claiming price for most of its life, and now it was in a 20 claimer, it had no chance because it didn't have any class. But some of those 10,000 claimers were faster than the 20,000 claimers they were running against. And we'd get 10 or 15 to 1 on the fastest horse in the race. Now, that doesn't happen anymore. But in those days, it did happen, and it was basically stealing. And from I'd say the middle 60s when I started playing up through the middle to late 70s. By the late 70s already, a lot of that easy edge had passed. And I was lucky that I'd learned from Ragozin how to handicap the patterns also, because by then you needed to be able to do that.
So
I don't know
no, this is perfect. And so I just want to kind of follow up on a few things. So yeah, the term react or bounce, that means different things to different people. Can you maybe describe a little bit like, so when a horse runs a number and then you say bounces or reacts to it, is there something physically going on with the horse that causes that? Or is it just a pattern? It's just a numerical thing? Or do you associate that with something that's actually happening with the horse?
Well, we assume that it's a physical thing. I mean, I don't think it's psychological. And I'm not big on thinking that the horses are running good or bad because of their mental state on a particular day. Naturally, horses can run good or bad for a lot of reasons. That is, you could have a horse that had a thorn in its foot, and they didn't find it for 3 months, and then they find it and they take it out, and the horse jumps up and runs it better. And trainers do have an effect on horses. They fix things. That's what they're there for. They treat the horse. A horse could get sick and run off races because it was sick, because sometimes the sickness isn't diagnosed. And the horses run even though it does have some kind of infection. I mean, all these things happen. And certainly a lot of the bouncing around and what we call patterns are because of these kind of physical ailments or illnesses that either develop or are cured. But I think that something else happens also. Horses run their hearts out every time. They run as hard as they can. And sometimes they run an effort that just knocks them out. And it takes them quite a while to recover from that effort. A lot of horses bounce because they've been run back too quickly from a significant effort. That is, they didn't get enough rest after that effort before their next race. And in some cases, it wouldn't matter how much rest you gave them unless you gave them 6 months. That's an effort that's going to knock that horse out. The horse gave everything he had, and there was nothing left, and it takes a while for the horse to get back to full strength. Now, of course, the trainers are trying to offset that. I mean, I remember I had a conversation once with Bob Baffert, who I didn't get along with all that well in any case. And his position as far as bouncing was concerned, it was his job to make sure that the horse didn't bounce. Well, okay. I mean, he could look at it that way. And trainers do things. Horses get jugged after races. That is, they're given a lot of electrolytes and various vitamins and minerals and whatever to try to replenish what the horse has used up in the effort of running the race. But they can only do so much. And some of the stronger trainers, and let's leave aside the question of whether everything they're doing is legal or not. Some of the stronger trainers are often able to get a horse to repeat a good effort or to only go back a couple of points off of a big effort before the horse tails off. That they can slow down the big effort. But I don't think that, even Service and Navarro, their horses peaked out with big tops. And it usually took them a while to get back to that big number. Now, naturally, they were getting numbers much better than what the horse should have been running. They were using incredible illegal performance-enhancing drugs, and they were as bad as it gets. And the same thing was true of Oscar Barrera in the old days, and probably Laz also, with his Mexican connections. But even so, even those trainers who were, able to move horses up and get them to run much better, they couldn't keep them at that level. The horses reacted, with very, very few exceptions. I mean, every once in a while you get a horse like Affirmed and Alidar who could just keep on running that same good number. But those are just the extreme exceptions. And even those horses can't do it if you run them too often. They were able to have those patterns because they had nice spacing between the races. And when they came back off the Derby 2 weeks into the Preakness, both of those horses reacted from their Derby effort in the Preakness, and went back 2 or 3 points. And you can't eliminate the bounce off of the horse's peak level of performance.
And I think that what you just described there, a horse is emptying the tank in a peak performance and then needing time to recover in order to kind of reproduce that peak performance. That has become sort of an accepted kind of principle that most trainers apply. You know, some people's dismay, especially at the higher levels, horses are racing much less frequently, I think, in particular because, people have believed that. Even Bob Baffert now will not typically be running his horses back quickly off of big efforts the way he did in the past. Would you kind of agree with that that's one sort of a principle, the condition handicapping approach that's sort of been incorporated into the way most trainers train today?
Well, I think that's true, and I think it's because of us. I mean, we've had a big,
no doubt,
big influence on the trainers. I mean, a good number of the top trainers use the sheets, and even the ones that don't use the sheets figure out a way to get sheet numbers on their horses. That is, they often don't get them directly themselves. They get them from somebody else. They have somebody else get an account with us and get the numbers on their horses. And, even trainers that don't look at the numbers have been influenced by the better results the trainers were getting when they gave their horses good timing between races. And, it's at this point, it's very rare when any horse who runs in the Derby that doesn't run well in the Derby shows up in the Preakness, because they don't want to come back on 2 weeks rest. And if they don't have any particular reason to, they don't. Like Chad Brown would never have run the horse that he came in, I don't know, was it second or third in the Derby?
Yeah, second, Sierra Leone. Yeah.
Right.
Second.
Yeah, he didn't think seriously about running that horse in the Preakness. I mean, 40 years ago, that horse would have been in the Preakness. To a horse that came in a strong second in the Derby, people wouldn't have thought about skipping the Preakness. But Chad Brown gives his horses time between races. And he also gives his jockeys instructions to save ground. He's bought into that also. He screams bloody murder at them if they go make a premature wide move. And he's not a sheet user. I think he has owners who are sheet users. So several of them use sheets, but I don't think that he does himself. But he's adopted a lot of the theories that came from analyzing patterns on the sheets.
So when people ask me, who do we have to blame for these trainers that are reluctant to race their horses very often, I'll tell them blame Lynn Friedman and Lynn Ragusan. It's their fault.
Yeah, that's fair enough. On the other hand, I believe that we have a large number of horses who are writing us thank you notes.
Oh, so you talked about a few patterns that you look for, and you kind of talked in general about, a horse cycling back towards its top, and you may, what's a healthy way or an unhealthy way to do that? Can you give it other, for the people who are sort of novice on this, other kinds of patterns that you look for, either positive or negative, that, are kind of some of the go-to things that helped you as a horse player when you kind of evolved from just the big edge you were getting from good performance figures to actually, leveraging that by looking at the patterns and applying these condition handicapping principles?
Well, let's take one of the bromides of horse racing that you hear all the time. Horse comes back off of a 6-month layoff, and the horse runs an effort. And the next time the horse comes out, the handicappers will say, well, he needed his last. You know, that was the prep, and now you're going to get the real effort. Well, by sheet standards, that's the wrong way to look at it. What you have to look at is what was that effort compared to what he ran before. That is, let's say you have a horse as a 3-year-old that circled around to 15s a few times. And then it got to the end of the year and they laid it off, and it came back 6 months later in May, and it runs a 17, 2 points slower than what its best was. And now it's coming back 3 weeks later. Well, to us, that would be a big bet against horse. The needed its last doesn't apply here because it ran an effort that was close to its top. It didn't match its top. And now it's coming back on relatively short rest, 3 weeks. And that number figures to take something out of the horse. That doesn't mean that the horse is finished, but it's a horse to bet against that next out. Now, if I saw a horse that came back and had that pattern, ran that 17, and then on 3 weeks rest, it ran a 21, and now it's 4 weeks later, well, then I would consider betting on the horse. Yeah, it ran an effort, reacted from it. Okay, well, I would expect it to react from that effort, particularly on less than 4 weeks rest. That's sort of a little bit of my dividing line as to, you know, for most situations, what you want between races. 4 to 5 weeks to me is the best gap between races for a horse who's, you know, just a normal horse, not a big time stakes horse. And now it's 7 weeks from that effort that ran the 17, because that is an effort for a horse who ran a 15. I mean, to my mind, any number within 4 points of a horse's top is some kind of an effort. And now I would think, well, now it's maybe ready to run the 15. The 17 was encouraging in the sense that it was one of his better efforts, even though it wasn't his best, and now it has enough time, and I'd be betting it third out. Well, let's say you have the same horse, comes back with 15 top, comes back off of a layoff, and runs a 22 first out. Well, it's possible that horse did need its last and will now jump forward second out. I mean, it would just be an odds question to me. I mean, if the horse was a very long price and a 15 looked like it could win the race, I might think about it. If it was a short price, I wouldn't be interested because it's speculative. There's no way of knowing. Sometimes you get a good situation where the horse, let's say, with a 15 top runs a 21 first out off the layoff, and then 3 weeks later runs a 20, and now you have a nice 4 or 5 weeks into the race. Well, for a 3-year-old turning 4, I'd probably be betting that horse to definitely go forward off the 21-20. To me, that would be a good pattern. But there's a lot of little patterns like this that exists, where basically what you're saying is that it's more likely the horse is going to run a good race off of this pattern, or it's more likely it's going to run a bad race, and you're adjusting for the odds and what the competition is in the race and trying to find somebody that's out of line, you know, that's going off at odds that are out of line with what its chances are in the race. because that's all that we're doing when we're betting. And, people who tell you before the race, oh, this horse is going to run super today. They may think they know that, but nobody can know that. First of all, you don't know what's happened since the horse's last race. Maybe it banged its head against the stall. Maybe it stepped on a nail. Maybe it got sick. Even if all your past performance analysis is 100% correct, you still don't know that the horse is going to run good on a particular day. All you can say is that, given all the history of the horse and of horses in general, that there's X percentage that it's going to run good. And you take that X percentage and the chances that if it does run good, that it will win the race, and you measure that against the odds the horse is going off at. And in my opinion, you look for a big overlay. If you're not getting twice the odds you think you should be getting, then you're not getting enough odds, because the chances are you're overestimating the horse that you like and you're underestimating the horses that you don't like. It's just sort of it's built into us, that kind of sort of optimistic thinking, so we always have to be careful to, give ourselves a lot of room for error in the analysis that we've made. And I try to do that. I mean, if I'm not getting twice the odds I think the horse deserves, I don't go after it.
So you hit on a lot of topics there, and I think that a big one was you kind of have this what I call a probabilistic approach to it. It's not like this horse is going to run this number, or this horse is going to run well. It's like there's a good chance this one's going to run well or not going to run well, and you have to factor that into what price you're getting for the horse to determine if you have value. But you have to put error bounds around your own estimate of the horse, and then you also have to factor in what the price you're getting, and like you said, kind of the natural biases probably to overrate the horses you like, and underrate the ones you don't, and make sure you've got a big edge before you pull the trigger on a bet. Is that kind of a fair summary of what you said?
That is certainly what I think is true. I know that when I look at races, I often, that there'll be a 10-horse race, and there'll be 3 horses in it that just look completely irrelevant to me, and I just cross them off. I'm not going to use those horses in any exotics or whatever if I play the race. But I have to understand that it is not true that any of those horses have a 0% chance in the race. They have a chance. It may only be 1%, 2%, 3%, to win the race. But they do have a chance. Now, to my handicapping and betting strategies, I don't care that they have that small percentage chance. I'm willing to accept that every once in a while, one of those horses is going to beat me. But generally, when you're looking at the odds, you actually do rate those horses at 0%. You don't think they could beat you. And to give you a little example of that, the horse that just won the Belmont, I would have given him close to a 0% chance to win the race. I sort of like the horses who finished second and third, although I thought they were underlays at the odds that they were going off at. But the winner, I didn't think had any chance at all in the race. But he won. And every once in a while, a horse has a pattern in the sheets, 10, 15, 25. And I'm never going to play that horse to run that 5. It's just going to be a horse that I'm tossing. And once in a while, those horses are going to run good. It's just a fact of life. There's a lot of randomness in horse racing. It's just like, those Yankee radio broadcasts. Whenever something funny happened that never happened again, John Sterling would say, well, that's baseball. Well, this is horse racing. We have to accept that there are going to be some random reversals of form that we're just not going to be able to deal with. So my feeling is that you've got to be a little conservative in your estimations of your horse's chance to win, and stick to that.
So I want to talk a little bit more about how you approach the betting side, but before I do that, I want to touch a little bit more on the sheets and the patterns. And you've kind of hinted at this some, but I thought maybe you could spend a little more time on. You do show the lifetime, the whole history of the horse, from if it started as a 2-year-old all the way to wherever age it is now. And you've talked about how you don't just look at the current numbers, but you put them in the context of what they've run in the past. And that's kind of part of a bigger pattern, I'd call it, in terms of the way a horse develops over time. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think, part of the reason that you show the races you do is to help people kind of spot those patterns as well.
Well, mostly our analysis is based on the idea that horses generally improve from 2 to 3 and 3 to 4. That is, a healthy horse, one that's developing in a healthy manner, is going to keep on getting better. They get bigger, they get stronger. Once you get to the end of the 4-year-old year, and certainly by the middle of the 5-year-old year, that presumption is gone. That is, you don't expect the horses to keep on improving. That doesn't mean that there aren't any that do. There are a whole bunch of horses that improve. Some of them run new tops at 8 years old, but not very many do. Now you're talking about a small percentage of the horses. Most of the horses develop from 2 to 3 to 4 and are improving. Now, the ones that, let's say they have a 20 top as a 2-year-old, and then they come out and they run 13 first out as a 3-year-old. Well, okay, so that horse improved and got better from 2 to 3, but it doesn't do us any good because the improvement was too much. There's no way of knowing now whether that horse is going to improve anymore. There's no presumption that it's going to get better than the 13. Maybe that 7 points of development is as much as there's going to be in that horse. What we're looking for is horses who develop more slowly, who improve between 1/4 and 1.25 points from their previous top. That's the area that we're most interested in. And when they do that, in the old days, Ragozin used to put condition letters on the sheets because he was using them himself. It didn't matter if he wrote something on the sheet. And he would rate horses A, B, C, and D. And the rating would be based on when the horse runs a number better than the last grouping of numbers that it's run. It wouldn't necessarily even have to be a better number than the horse's peak performance. Maybe a horse had a 15 in January, and then between February and October ran a lot of races between 20 and 25, sort of bouncing around. and then it ran an 18 or a 19, a little better than any of those races over a 7-month period. Well, he would rate that. I mean, it would be a recovery rating, but still he would rate that because he liked to look for bets on horses that were recovering back to their better numbers. It's a very subtle read to make, and you have to be careful when you're making that read. And even in that situation, it's only really a recovery number if that number is just a little better than the best that it's run since the previous top number. But mostly for condition handicappers, what we're looking for is a horse who's just run a little better than what the best race it ever ran. And we're looking to play that horse 6 to 8 weeks from when it ran that number. You know, sometimes we'll play it on 4 weeks if the overall pattern is very strong, if the horse never seems to react much from numbers. You know, and that's a big portion of the you know, what we're looking for in terms of making a play based on the idea that the horse is going to run as good or better than it's ever run in its life. I mean, we may make a lot of bets on horses that are we think is going to run a number 2 or 3 points off its top, but it's really good odds and that number figures to have a chance to win. I mean, I don't mind making a bet like that, but I particularly like the bets on horses that I would give an A condition rating to. That is, the horse that's still young enough to be developing and has just run a little better than the best it's ever run, and you have nice timing from that number. To me, that's the best kind of bets. There's a few other patterns that I like a lot. I like betting on 4-year-olds who have just come within, on their first race as a 4-year-old off of a gap, they run within a 1/4 point of their 3-year-old best. Those horses do pretty well next time out. About a 1/4 of them run new tops and a 1/4 of them repeat. And if you're getting nice odds value, I like that bet a lot. I mean, I know it doesn't sound much to say a 1/4 of the horses are going to repeat and a 1/4 go forward. Well, that means 50% are going to go backward. But off of top efforts, a lot more than 50% go backward. It's probably more up to the 80% range that off of top efforts, horses react from those efforts. And certainly off of top efforts, you don't get 25% new tops. You know, getting 25% new tops is an enormous edge because most handicappers are stuck with at most projecting the horse to run as good as it's ever run. You know, why pick on this particular day that the horse is going to run better than its previous 19 races? Well, if you can make a projection that you think it's got a 25% chance to run better than its previous 19 races, you're probably going to get a betting edge. It's not a sure thing, but probably the horse is going to be longer than odds than it should be for that race. So those are the ones that come to mind immediately. I suppose there are other ones that I do also, but we could be here all day if I go through everything.
Well, no, we won't be here all day, but I mean, that's a great example of what I was talking. I mean, exactly, you know, you're not just looking at what it just ran, but you're comparing that to what it ran might have been a 6 months or a year before, right? And that number that it ran 6 months or a year before is really important in helping you understand what the condition of that horse is. Even whereas, a lot of people, I call it recency bias. They tend to be just focused on, the last race or the last couple of races, but you're taking in that whole history of development of that horse and using that to sort of identify what you think the condition of that horse is and what's the likelihood of it running a good race. I think that's quite a bit different than many other people would approach it.
Well, I hope that that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm trying to do when I handicap. And it's a certain amount of work to do it, and you have to discipline yourself to be careful that you're not doing what you say, the recency handicapping. Because there's really no point in having sheets if you're just looking at the last number. And I know we probably have some customers that pretty much do that, but we have a lot that are taking a more sophisticated approach.
Now, I like the way you sort of quantified probabilities of, running a new top or running a good race. Is that just sort of gut, or do you actually identify systematically patterns and have gone back and actually measured the percentage of horses that improve or regress off those patterns? Have you done that sort of math, or is that just more of a kind of estimate based on your experience over time?
Well, the 4-year-old running within a quarter point of the 3-year-old top came from one of the seminars that I did. Oh God, that's too many years ago to think about. It must be now 45 to 50 years ago that I did those seminar tapes. I actually went through, in those days, we had the sheets were on sort of a thin cardboard that we used to file. And then when the entries for the day were looked at, we went into those files and picked out all the horses who were running that day. And that's how we got the sheets for that day's racing. Well, the other thing you could do with those files is you could just take big chunks of them and look through them. And I had sort of thought that idea of the 4-year-old running the 3-year-old top first out was a very good sign. Just off the seat of my pants, from looking, handicapping for years at that point, I thought so. But I actually pulled out about 3,000 or 4,000 sheets and went through them and looked for horses that ran the matching the top race as a first out as a 4-year-old. And I kept, I made a record of how those horses did. And that's where the 25% repeating and 25% going forward comes from. I looked at all those thousands of horses, and there were, several hundred that fit in that category. And that's the way it broke down. And I haven't done that on a lot of other things that I'm pretty confident about. And the idea of 3-year-olds that run a little better than their 2-year-old top, being big favorites to move forward again within, 6 to 8 weeks, that I know is correct. It's a seat of the pants thing, but I don't have any question about that. And loads of other people agree that is a very positive betting pattern to use. Some of the other things I did went through several thousand sheets looking for horses who ran 2 to 3 points off of their previous year's top, first time off a layoff, and 80% plus of those went backwards next out. I did check that one out once. But to be honest, I haven't done that kind of analysis again. I'm cashing bets off of those reads, so I don't have any reason to go back over it again, to tell you the truth, and it would be a lot of work.
So that last pattern, that was great. So it sounds like you have there's been a few that you've looked into, but most of them just kind of gained over experience. But the last one was an interesting one. You've talked about it a couple of times now. It's sort of a negative pattern, right? Where you had a horse where you're saying 80% of the time it's going to regress. So you're going to be against that horse. So can you talk about some more maybe of those negative patterns, especially that might come when a horse is going to be a favorite or a strong favorite, because a bad favorite and that you're confident you can bet against is probably as valuable as a horse you think could run well at a price. So a little bit more about those negative patterns and how to spot maybe a vulnerable favorite, because I think there'd be a lot of value from a betting standpoint in that.
Well, I like to play against horses who run a top effort and then go back a couple of points off of that, and then go back a point or two more the third out, like a horse that comes around to a 10 top and then runs a 12, 14. Next time out, I really don't like that horse. And I bet anything against that pattern. Assuming the next race is in a sequence that is timely. I mean, if a horse runs 10, 12, 14, and then doesn't run for 3 months, well, all bets are off. Because to me, the reason why the 10, 12, 14 is a good thing to bet against is the horses hit something that it set it back, and it's just slowly going backwards. So it's still being affected by the efforts that it's putting out. Once you give it the 3 months rest, well, then it could come back and run a decent effort. But if it just comes back on the usual 3, 4, even 5 weeks rest, because even a little extra rest wouldn't be counter to making that read to me. That's sort of a specific thing. There are other things that I don't like. I really don't like a horse who, let's say it had a 20 top back in January, and then it starts running races 24 to 30 and bounces around, and then runs a 22, 2 points off of its top. I would not want to bet that horse on less than 2 months rest off of that race. I would regard that race as most likely being a significant effort. And if the horse comes back on less than 2 months rest, it's likely to react from that number and run 24, 25 and up. And the quicker it comes back off of the 22, the worst number that I'm going to project for it. If it comes back on 3 weeks rest, I'm going to give it a 28 off of the 22. I'm going to expect it to react considerably from that. And you often get, an overlay based on that, because that the fact that the horse ran a better race than it's run for quite a while may well look like the horse is rounding back into form and is about to run back to its better races. So that kind of read is sort of useful to me. I mean, the problem is that you don't get enough of these reads. In a lot of races, it'll be, an 8-horse race, and there won't be a single horse in the race that is currently running within 5 points of its best. They'll all be sort of what I call sort of junky patterns. They're just bouncing around 5 to 10 points off of their best. And it's very hard to read where they're going to go on a particular day. The only good thing is that you're not required to bet every race. When I first started using the sheets and everything, I bet almost every race. There was a play almost every race. But now on an average card, I would say maybe I bet 2 to 3 races. And sometimes it isn't even betting a race. It's betting a horizontal where I don't really have any big opinion about any one particular horse, but there's a few horses that are short prices that I want to toss in successive races. So I play some horizontals to try to get the edge that way by tossing those horses, even though I have little opinion about many of the other horses in the race. I play, pick 4s where I'm spreading 5, 6, 5, 7 in the number of horses that I use, if I'm getting rid of enough short price horses to make it worthwhile.
So, the key there is getting rid of those short price horses. So from what, way I'd kind of summarize the most negative horses that are likely to be the kind of favorites you'd be tossing would be horses that in the faster they ran their most recent race relative to their previous top, certainly if it's much faster than they've ever run or close to what their fastest, that's a negative. And then the quicker they run back after that makes them even more negative. So I would guess that a horse that comes off the best effort of his life by far, and then comes back on short rest, those are the kind you're going to be eager to toss in a horizontal play. Or am I oversimplifying things, or is that a
little
fair,
bit? A little bit. There are some of those that I would be eagerly tossing. There are some that I would be scared to toss. If Brad Cox has a horse coming back on a couple of weeks rest off a top, I'm not going to assume that the horse is going to bounce, because I know a lot of his horses pair up on short rest off of big efforts. Now, if a horse with that same pattern comes back for a trainer who isn't as strong as Brad Cox, well, then yes, it's going to be a toss for me that way. You have to sort of, incorporate the trainers to some extent in this kind of evaluation. Now, in terms of the condition handicapping reads, I don't pay any attention to the trainers at all. Excuse me. In fact, I think it's stronger if the trainer is not a strong trainer. If the horse has made, a small improvement off of its previous top, and now you have nice timing, I'd rather play that on a trainer that isn't strong, because I think the strong trainers, they're doing things that may interfere with the condition reads. I mean, I still play it. But I like it best if it isn't a strong trainer in those kind of reads. But now, on the other hand, if you're talking about, a horse that, just ran a big effort, it worries me if it's one of the very strong trainers, because I know that they get a lot of pair-ups or only small backward moves off of their big efforts. And the timing doesn't matter as much to them. And I would say that even for the strong trainers, when they get a second big effort, particularly if it's on short rest, I'll bet against that no matter who the trainer is. With exceptions for trainers like when Service and Navarro were doing that crazy stuff. And I don't think there's anybody today that's as dangerous as they were, when they were at their high point. But that's certainly something that I do very much like to bet against, is horses who paired up or close to paired up big efforts on short rests. Next time out, I'm going to toss them. And you often you often get very good value on that because you're tossing a horse off of two good efforts in a row. They figure to go off even shorter in odds.
And even from a strong barn, you're saying even from the strong barns, if the first effort, you might be a little leery of them coming back with another good one. But if they do two of them, especially off the second one off short rest, you're maybe going to lean against that horse, even if it is Brad Cox or one of the trainers that
that's right.
Are stronger.
Yes. And I'm not picking on Brad Cox,
right,
as the whipping boy. There's 20 or 30 Brad Coxes around the country.
But the stronger trainers, right? Yeah.
That's right. And my feeling is that's right. That when they get that second big effort on short rest, that's going to knock them out for a while. I mean, if they come back, in a regular period of time, 3, 4, 5 weeks after that pair up, or even if it's a slight regression, they're going to run back from that level. They may not completely X out. If they ran a couple of 10s, maybe they'll only go back to a 13 or a 14 for one of the strong trainers. But generally, that's enough to be betting against a horse. If a horse is going to run
in the horizontal, yeah.
In any race, it's going to be worth betting against him. If the horse is going to run 3 to 4 points slower than what it just ran twice, it almost surely is going to be going off at much shorter odds than it should. It's not to say that sometimes it may be in a race where that slower number could win. But even in those circumstances, the horse is going to be a big underlay, because if that slower number has any chance to win at all, the horse is probably going to be going off at odds on, because people are going to be looking at those two better numbers. Those races are going to look much better than what it needs to win this race. And so even though it has a chance to win, it's not going to have the 3 to 5 chance to win. It's still going to be a horse to bet against. You can't be looking at these things and worrying that the 3 to 5 shot you're betting against has a 25% chance to win, and therefore just that is cutting 25% chance off of your winning the horizontal wager. You just can't look at it that way. You're getting tremendous value, and you just have to accept you're not going to win every bet that you make. You're only trying to win enough of them at a good enough odds result to end up with more money than you started with. That's all you're trying to do.
That's a great summary of the winning approach to playing, and actually being able to accept that and execute that is one of the big challenges of being successful. Being able to say, I'm gonna, I do have a chance to lose this bet, but I think based on my opinion, in the long run, I'll come out ahead by making the bet, and just accept it when you lose. But you're right. That the way you summarize that kind of that's the mindset you have to be successful.
Yeah, well, I certainly agree.
Okay. That wraps up part 1 of our discussion with Len Friedman. Part 2 will be coming soon, so please stay tuned. And in the meantime, may you boldly go where no horse player has gone before.